Good afternoon, everyone. We are Group 7, and our group consists of Kyaw, Sze Yan, Jiwon, and Sze. Today, we will be presenting on self-driving cars, how this technology can benefit us, and give a high-level overview of the scientific and technical processes behind their development. In just the time I took to say the previous sentence, one person has passed away from a car accident. Imagine if you could prolong this duration or even eliminate this timer altogether. Countless of lives can be saved, and self-driving cars could be a solution to this problem. Yet, despite the immense benefits of self-driving cars can bring to humanity, there remains many challenges that are yet to be solved to create a fully autonomous self-driving car. The benefits that fully autonomous self-driving cars bring are more than just a new way of transportation that's safer. It is also about improving access to mobility and increasing efficiency in our daily commute. In terms of enhancing mobility, self-driving cars could open up opportunities for people with disabilities, like the blind, to be capable of self-sufficiency without needing to rely on a driver. It could also enhance the independence of seniors since there's no need for a fully capable driver. It could also lead to more ride-sharing schemes, which would reduce the cost of personal transportation and lead to more affordable mobility. It can also increase the efficiency for people to move about and give us the ability to be productive during the time spent on transportation. There could be the convenience of dropping off at destinations without the need to find parking, with the car parking itself at a suitable location and just needing to summon it back later on, which saves a lot of time. Occupants would also be able to pursue more productive activities while traveling instead of driving, such as responding to emails or catching up on some last-minute work. Not having to deal with traffic would also reduce a lot of stress and anxiety for all road users. When we think about what properties self-driving cars should have, they are the following. First, a vehicle needs to be capable. It needs to be able to handle the entire task of driving. It cannot just do a subset of it and still occasionally rely on a human operator. Besides that, these tasks need to be done safely in all situations, including the complex and rare situations one may encounter on the road. It may be a straightforward effort to train a self-driving car to deal with the common cases, but it would take another level of effort to handle the exceptional ones. So what are these exceptional cases? Well, let's look at these real footages obtained from vehicles. Let's see if you can spot what is exceptional in this video. At the bottom right-hand corner, we can see a cyclist, and for some strange reason, he is carrying a stop sign that is similar to the ones we find on the roads. This is definitely not the stop sign a vehicle needs to stop for, and the self-driving car needs to understand that. If it is just blindly trained to stop at stop signs, then it would decide to suddenly stop upon seeing the cyclist and possibly cause an accident. Let's see another footage. Here, the car is just driving as usual when suddenly these metal pipes fall towards it. The car now needs to know how to handle this and how it should react to it. Such a situation is one in which even most human drivers might not know how to handle. But when it comes to self-driving cars, the liability would be on the self-driving car to respond to it correctly. Now, you might be wondering, where are we now with self-driving cars? Well, even though research and development has been ongoing for a few years, the publicly available state-of-the-art autonomous vehicles are only capable of enhancing the driver's abilities and not completely replacing them. They can take over the tedious task of maintaining lanes on expressways, monitoring and matching the speed of surrounding vehicles, and can even be summoned to us if we are waiting at some parking lot or foyer. Those capabilities are impressive in their own right, but it is still a far reach from a fully autonomous vehicle, which gives the benefits that we mentioned earlier. So in what areas can there be improvements and innovations on? And how do self-driving cars actually work? My other group mates will elaborate on the topics.
Now we move on to what exactly self-driving consists of. To know this, let's delve a little bit further into the main tasks of self-driving, which are perception, prediction, and planning. Sensors on self-driving cars vary from model to model, but the three most important sensors are radar sensors, LiDAR sensors, and of course, cameras. Radar sensors send out radio waves and sense how long it takes for these waves to bounce back to the sensor from an object it hit and in which the direction it comes back from. This information is then processed to build a model of the environment. LiDAR sensors are similar to radar sensors but uses lasers instead of radio waves, which allows for much faster and more detailed mapping of the environment. As for cameras, since they are rather cheap and can only capture images in a single direction, there tend to be many cameras mounted on various parts of the car. In comparison, there tends to be at most 1 or 2 LiDAR and radar sensors on each car, owing to the expensive nature of these sensors and the fact that they gather data from all directions. With all the data from these sensors, the computer within the self-driving car will stitch them all together into a comprehensive representation of the environment or scene. After that, it will attempt to identify the objects in the scene using artificial intelligence models. In general, AI models are a large set of complex and interconnected mathematical equations with parameters that can be adjusted. These parameters need to be adjusted properly so that the AI does the intelligence part of its name well, and this is done by feeding it data on a task it is supposed to solve. These parameters are like knobs on an analog radio, and one needs to find the sweet spot or frequency where the radio station is playing. For the case of an AI model tasked with the detection of cars and pedestrians from images, it needs to be fed thousands, if not millions, of labeled images with cars and pedestrians within them. It is like teaching a child, but more repetitive and straightforward. However, the challenge in self-driving car perception is that the variety of things that the car needs to correctly identify is very large. There are many types of objects with various appearance, colors, and poses. For instance, people can be randomly wearing dinosaur costumes, or there can be birds on the roads which just don't care about vehicles, or emergency vehicles like ambulances or fire engines which the self-driving car needs to give way to. Humans would react to these situations using their intuition and prior knowledge, but the self-driving car needs to be explicitly taught that. There can also be different environments that the car can be in that can alter the perception of these objects, like day or night, which will affect visibility, or rainy or snowy days, which could occlude certain objects from the camera or sensors or expressway, or even in the landed property areas or HDBs. There's also special cases like reflections on the road after a downpour, or a person carrying a big box of ducks, which the car needs to correctly identify as a human riding a cycle instead of many animals, or in the case of Singapore, a horse on a road, and so on. So, in any point of time, the car needs to map the input data from the sensors and cameras into a representation that makes sense and accounts for the objects, environmental, object variations, and correctly identify the exceptional cases.
Now, let us look at what the AI models actually see on a Tesla self-driving car. This was obtained from someone who managed to hack into his Tesla and get the visual data. Here, we see that the AI model is generally able to detect cars, cycles, pedestrians, and draw boxes and paths around them, but this is just a general case. In more complex situations, the AI model fails to perform as designed. In this screenshot, the AI model is struggling to detect a person who is rollerblading, confusing him as a cyclist or a pedestrian. In this other screenshot, it did not even detect the person at the side at all. This shows that there is still much room for improvement in the task of perception, and this is especially important since this poor performance was captured on a self-driving vehicle that is already commercially available. The next step after perception is prediction. Apart from just seeing what is currently happening in the environment, the car needs to anticipate and predict what the objects are going to do. And the fact that most moving objects are controlled by people makes this challenging, since people are quite unpredictable, especially on the roads. This prediction also needs to be fairly long-term, since the car might be moving and will need time to react to other objects, such as to brake and come to a complete stop. So, what goes into anticipating the future? Well, the car can watch past behavior, like, oh, this person is walking very fast, so maybe he might start running. Or maybe this person is looking at the road from the side and maybe he's going to cross it soon. There is also scene cinematics and appearance cues, like the car is at a traffic light and the light is red, so the car next to me will probably not move until the light turns green. This too is handled by AI models, but instead of just the labeled images and videos that perception uses, the data now has to be a sequential set of videos and images and much more in volume. Finally, we have planning. This is basically decision making. It produces vehicle behavior like accelerate or slow down or brake and so on. And in making such decisions, usually the decisions have to be safe, comfortable for the passengers, like it shouldn't just brake suddenly and throw the passenger out of the windscreen, and also send the right signals to other vehicles in the environment, like other cars need to be able to understand what the car is doing. And finally and obviously, it needs to make progress towards a destination. This too is handled by AI and uses a special form of AI known as reinforcement learning, where the AI model is taught to walk towards an ideal state in an environment while minimizing any errors. In this case, the ideal state is to reach the destination and the errors need to be near zero, or ideally zero. So how do companies like Tesla and Waymo develop self-driving vehicles? It can be viewed as a cyclical process of iterative improvement. First, we have the car being driven around, be it through self-driving technology or using a human driver. While driving, data is collected by the sensors on the car. The collected data then gets manually cleaned and labeled by humans. Data cleaning here refers to the removal or modification of any data that might not be useful for training AI models. For example, in an image, if snow or moisture has occluded most of the view, then the image will be discarded. Data labeling means that the images from the camera and the LiDAR and radar data are visualized, and labelers manually annotate parts of the data corresponding to specific objects of interest. For example, in an image, the manual labelers will draw a box around each pedestrian and car and label them as such. Once the data has been cleaned and labeled, the data is then used to train the AI models again, even if they have been trained on other data before. This is so that the AI models will learn new knowledge about the task from the new data and possibly become better at performing the task. After the models are trained, they are tested to ensure that they meet at least some baseline quality and safety, and then loaded onto the cars again to get even more data. This process keeps on going on, and hopefully the models get better and better. At every point in this cycle of collecting data, training AI models, and deploying the cars, there is room for improvement and innovation so that one day, actual full self-driving cars can be achieved. In the next section, let's take a look at some potential areas for improvement.
Firstly, there can be improvements in computing hardware and infrastructure. The speed of the computers and processors on the actual vehicle affects how fast data from sensors are processed by the AI models for perception, prediction, and planning. The faster the hardware, the better it is. And for this, one key area is processor design, and this is evident in Tesla's recently unveiled purpose-built chip, specifically optimized for running AI models on its vehicles. The new processor chip increased the car's ability to process data and run AI models by 2,100%, and this allows it to process 2,300 frames of data per second, which is way more than the 110 frames per second on the previous generation of chips. In ensuring safety, quick reactions are important, and improvements in processor design can ensure that future accidents do not occur because the self-driving vehicle was taking too long to process data. Next, we have data. If it is not evident by this point, data is the most critical resource when it comes to training AI models, and the quality of data can make the difference between life and death, literally. The unique thing about self-driving car data is that it cannot be obtained without actually spending time to drive the car around in various situations. Even if the cars are driven for a long period of time, there might still be deficiencies in the data collected. And this is because most of the data collected will just be for normal situations and not for the rare and exceptional cases. If the AI models are trained with all of the data, then it might not pay too much attention to those exceptional cases which might not even exist in the data. The model might say it has a 99% accuracy, which seems amazing and near perfect, but the 1% that got it wrong might be the exceptional case. And we simply cannot accept such a failure since it will cause an accident that can potentially take lives. And this has happened before. There was an accident when Uber's self-driving car knocked into a pedestrian who unfortunately passed away. The main issue was that the AI model responsible for perception of the car failed to identify what the object in its view was, jumping from unidentified object to car, to cyclist to person, with no absolute certainty in the trajectory path of the object. The vehicle was only able to correctly and confidently identify that it was a person when it got very close to the pedestrian, at which point it started to brake. But it could not slow down enough, and it crashed into the pedestrian who was crossing the road at fatal speed. So, what can be improved here? There can be innovation in the way data is collected. Instead of actually driving the car around in real life, Waymo, a company, has created a simulation environment to generate synthetic data where it simulates the car and sensors in a virtual world and collects synthetic data, which does not work as well as real-life data, but still is better than having no data at all. There can also be real-life setups where the exceptional cases are purposefully created for the car to collect data on in a controlled and safe environment. There is also room for innovation in the way the data is collected and labeled. As the data collected is in a sequential manner, there can also be auto-labeling done where, for example, manual labelers would only need to label one frame of video data collected, and the next few frames will be automatically labeled since the objects in the initial frame would be either stationary or moving in a particular direction and not just disappear from one frame to the next. Well, that sounds like a lot of challenges and areas for improvement. But does that mean self-driving cars are just a dream for now? Even a decade ago, it might have been. And while we are not yet there, I think all of us can agree that artificial intelligence and the technology related are developing faster than ever before. And it might not be long before we see a fully autonomous vehicle in the market. Today we presented on the different components of a self-driving car, its requirements, and the challenges involved. Thank you, and please feel free to email us any questions that you may have.